Hello and welcome to Beyond the Mist, the behind-the-scenes game mastering podcast about Mistworld. My name is Daniel, I am the storyteller, and just want to talk about how we set up for episode 4 of Mistworld. Now, this one was a bit of a special event. We were missing one of our players, and I thought to myself, well, my plan had been in the past, when that happens, rather than either not running or trying to struggle through down one player, we'd instead have backstory events. So I'd asked the players before we started setting up for a bit of information about their backstory, about who they were before they got on the ship or during the ship, and that way I'd be able to find ways to either tie it into current times, into existing stories, or have a player session where we go into a major event that happened in their backstory. Now for this one we were looking into Mr. Whitbear. Just felt a bit timely considering that there was quite a bit of mystery at this point about their backstory and why they acted the way they were doing in Bastion. And so when I asked everyone for their backstories, Connor, who plays Mr. Whitbear, gave me this backstory where he had once been a partner with their brother in a bakery concern with an enormous name, and when they were much, much, much younger, but then he inadvertently burnt it down and left fearing that he would be kicked out of the family and be blamed for arson. But what the character didn't realize was that the company had actually been well insured, and as a result had gone on to bigger and better things. And he also gave me the nice little Solo connection, if you've seen the Star Wars movie Solo, where the reason why his character's called Mr. Whitbear was because he was in a customs office and he saw crates of wheat beer behind the person he was dealing with. So that's the information I had. That's the point that I needed to reach, because obviously when you hear the story, I had to do a session about the arson. I couldn't not do it. Now, in terms of the inspiration for today's session, I didn't have much time to prepare. We really only decided pretty much that day that we were going to do a backstory episode, and so while I had that point in my past, I hadn't sat down and drawn anything up. What I did decide though was that I was going to take an idea that I stole from an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. For those of you unfamiliar with the series, basically there was a character who had recently adopted a son from overseas, and it was their first Christmas together, and he'd ordered a special action figure from this kid's home country, which had subsequently been intercepted and stolen by Mafia, along with a whole bunch of other goods that were... And none of the other goods were interested in Mafia. They're after one thing in particular, and his character's toy had just gotten swept up in the mess. So I saw that episode and thought, that's a great way to have something be stolen, have something be not important to the people who stole it, but still have dangerous people involved, something otherwise fairly innocuous. Now, with the story about how he burnt it down, it meant to me as well that the package would be the explosive. It had to be something safe enough that a bakery would order it, but also dangerous enough that that it would cause the final explosion. Without realizing what it was, something bad could happen. And not sure how much of common knowledge this is in history, but flour mills especially used to be really dangerous places. You couldn't have open flames around them, simply because the dust particles, the flour, would be kind of wafting through the air, and would build up a kind of explosiveness as a result around them, which could potentially, I believe there was a story about 18 people being killed when a flour mill exploded one time as a result of this mix of dust meeting fire. So I thought, well, it's a fantasy world. If the flowers come from a group of people who use explosives, e.g. dwarves, then they would have potentially something mixed through it that would be explosive. And at the last minute I decided that Mr. Whitbear in this backstory would be accompanied by children, by his nieces and nephews, and that they would play with the dust and that would get it to go everywhere, and thus the door would be set, the scene would be set for an accidental explosion that would result in Mr. Whitbear leaving and fleeing for his life. So with that in mind, we open on the scene where the brothers are talking about their money and how they were going to get it. His brother Nice has come up with this with a special plan. He's got a special delivery on the way, and so he asks his brother to go fetch the surprise. And while he's at it, take a couple of their nieces and nephews, the young kids that are hanging around, who are played by my other players, to just to give them a run. Should be a safe trip, down to the post office and back. Shouldn't be any problems at all. Of course, once they get there, the package has been intercepted by this halfling mafia group. Initially, I thought it was going to be goblins against goblins, but then Lockie, who plays Henry Goodbarrel, while we were getting ready, suggested, well, just as an offhand comment, said, well, is the other are there going to be like a confirmation of racism against halflings? And of course, my reaction is there now is, and so that second gang, the first gang, the main gang, went from being another group of goblins to being a pack of halflings. So basically getting the players go along there. When I have these sessions, when I have these games, when I have it's going to be a once-off and success is inevitable because it's going to explain something, I tend to go with succeeding forward. So no matter what, when the players roll, unless it's in combat, they're going to get a success in what they're trying to do. So when the players are told about how the fact that this package had been intercepted by a gang, no matter which way they sought the information, they would have gotten it. But if they fail on their dice, rather than it mean they don't get the information, it means they get the information and a complication that needs to be solved. So if the players had, for instance, decided to go with Lockie's character's mate and try and find out where the factory is and failed, it would have meant that they would have gotten the information, but now the mate's dad might have seen them threatening their son and is now calling the cops on them, and so for the rest of the adventure they need to avoid the attention of the police and the mafia. Something like that. So it just ends up being a way of making sure they get the information they need, the players progress to the places they need to go, but they're closing off options for other ways they can do things. In terms of how we get into the warehouse, didn't really have a plan there. It was just more about they had to get into this package before it was burnt up. So again, adding that environmental timer I've mentioned before of, well, it looks like it might be next on the pile. What are you guys going to do? You need to move this along. So having that forcing them to keep moving and keep a pace. Didn't really come up. They were straight into it. But if they were starting lollygagging or taking too much time preparing to enter rather than just entering, then the person might have picked up the box and been ready to throw that in, but distracted by a quick conversation with another gang member or something like that. Just really keep that pressure on. As for the combat of things, I feel like Lockie was trying to be the most outlandish child possible with the whole seagull shenanigans. Lean in when your characters are being a bit silly like that. It's okay. So when he started saying he was a seagull and he was stomping about on the roof and going caw, I mentioned I was decided at the moment there's going to be a 50-50 chance that that's a gang signature. And sure enough, he succeeded in the role, and suddenly the halflings weren't concerned about a bunch of randos fighting the warehouse. Suddenly it was a raid by another gang, which upped the distraction, but also upped the potential danger as they would start fighting a bit harder. And that's pretty much it. It was a very quick session. There were really only the two scenes, or the one scene really, with the warehouse. Everything else was just kind of incidental. The post office, back at the bakery, etc. When they went back, the hardest part was just working out how I was going to separate the kids from Connor's character to make sure that they didn't get caught up in an explosion, because otherwise they'd be either I need to explain dead kids, not going to happen, or need to explain how these kids had no idea that someone else had also survived the explosion. So instead I just suggested to send them home. It's getting late, get them home. Fortunately, Connor picked up what I was saying, and it meant that that's part of the story was much easier. And so we have this little moment where he goes to the port. He has this little Han Solo moment where we find out why he's called Mr. Whitber, and also potentially why he starts working on the ships and starts getting the experience that makes him the character we see in the rest of the series. I have had a lot of fun doing these, and just judging back from the feedback of my players, it's so fun having these little backstory things, because it lets one character shine a lot more, but also lets everyone have a bit of fun. But as I warned them during the episode, only one character has plot armor. The rest, anyone else, is potentially fair game. I'm not sure if we're going to do the other characters within these sessions. It would be fun, and when that happens, obviously I'll be doing another episode like that. But it's just something to keep in mind for your characters. If you just end up short a few players, do someone's backstory, do maybe a side event. Another thing I've done with these is have characters completely unconnected to the players, but in the same town, and doing their own thing. And then, for instance, I had one group who released a T-Rex during the episode onto a town, and in the next episode there was a T-Rex stampeding around, and the regular party had to resolve that and deal with that in their own way. So even though the players knew why there was a T-Rex rampaging around, everyone was just like, where did this thing come from? And it was because that the previous session they'd released something untoward. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Once again, hope that you guys get some information out of us or some ideas. Remember, I always say, steal everything. This episode was stolen by Brooklyn Nine-Nine and vague knowledge about flour mills being explosive. And that's all I needed to put the rest together. Have a good evening. Talk to you soon.